Hey YouTube, it's Jurak Master, and this is going to be a Kaijudo deck profile. It's my Hyperspeed Dragon deck. Looking at the card back when we first got to see the effect and everything, just looked at it, thought the deck's going to be broken, and turns out it is pretty good. So I figured I'd show my version of it, and I haven't played it at like a tournament or anything yet, but it's been testing pretty well. So I'm gonna just show you guys my build, see how you like it. I'll try to put the list in the description too if you guys want to check that out down there. So I'm gonna quickly switch camera modes, and obviously we've got the main engine of the deck. We've got the 3 Hyperspeed Dragons and 3 Great Arena. Want to jump into that. These 6 cards like make the deck. It's kind of like your opponent has to choose between the 2. They can't really remove all of them that easily. The Great Arena does unfortunately die to stuff like Bone Blades, but if they're killing the Great Arena with Bone Blades one turn, and then doing something like Death Smoke to Hyperspeed Dragon, you're really just going 1 for 1 anyway, and it's just stalling until you can get your big creatures out. So that's good. A lot of times they won't have enough removal to get rid of both, though. So they're either choosing to get rid of a Hyperspeed Dragon or the Great Arena. Or, you know, you could have 2 of these and 1 of these or 2 of these. These things add up so well. These things are just kind of like, if I have 2, you kind of can't get rid of the effect unless you can kill off 2. And they get a little harder to kill once you have your Essence Elves out, because then they can't be Tornado Flamed off. You have to get rid of the Essence Elf first. And the engine's just so good. This thing comes out turn 4, gets your effects started, and if they can't get rid of it then, and a lot of times they won't because you've got stuff like your Essence Elves out already, which they want to get rid of, or whatever the case may be. A lot of times they won't be able to get rid of it, but a fair number of times they will. And sometimes they just leave it thinking, I need to save my removal for Hyperspeed Dragon, and they do. The exception being something like Bone Blades. And I guess when people play it, Rock Bite, but that still doesn't affect the Great Arena too much, because the Great Arena comes out after Essence Elf. For the most part, you have Essence Elf out at that point. But then after the Great Arena comes out, you've got your Hyperspeed Dragon. And the next turn, this thing's still alive, you play the Hyperspeed Dragon, assuming you have both and can get both by the time, which does happen a fair amount. As you'll see with some of my deck later on, you might see why. But when the Great Arena comes out, you've got, when this comes out, the Great Arena's effect goes off, you draw a card. They work so well with each other, and they just both make it so that the deck works with either one of them. You don't have to have Hyperspeed Dragon for this deck to work. A deck based on 1 card isn't a very good deck for the most part, unless you have a really consistent way of making that work. So obviously the next part of this deck is going to be the dragons that go with it, the armored dragons. Now, I've got 3 Tatsurion the Unchained, good effects, rather, plural. I've got 2 Moorna Gatling Dragon, 2 Bolgash Dragon, and 2 Lord Skycrusher. So I want to go over my reasoning on these. First off, the 3 Tatsurion and only 2 Moorna. Moorna's amazing. It controls a lot of things for a deck like this one, where it's kind of reliant on being able to survive because it doesn't have blockers. You need to control your opponent's creatures, or you need to get right at them before they can kill you, which in this deck doesn't typically happen. I find it that I'm controlling the opponent more throughout the game, or or as I said earlier, they're controlling me until it's kind of whoever can play the biggest creatures each turn wins, at which point I'm going to be winning, and they're not. So that kind of stinks for them. And the reason that Tatsurion is in here over the the third Tatsurion's in here over the third Moorna is because of Hyperspeed Dragon. I know that might sound a little weird, but if you don't have Hyperspeed Dragon and you're in a pinch, Moorna's not saving you when you drop it. This thing can. It can remove a creature when it comes into play, even without a Hyperspeed Dragon out, which is why I have 3 of this and only 2 Moorna. If this wasn't useful over this on drop without Hyperspeed Dragon, this would be at 3 and this would be at 2. That's just my personal preference. And there we go on that part of this. The next part is the 2 Bolgash and the 2 Skycrusher. Now, some of you might know that as I'm making this, I only have 2 Bolgash Dragon, but that doesn't completely factor into this decision. I might run 3 in the future, but in this build, I'm kind of happy with 2. I don't often need a turn 6 drop. When I do, you know, it's okay to have a level 6 to drop on them, but I don't always need it. The level 7s do me just fine. I guess a 3rd Bolgash Dragon would work well, and I probably will add it in the future, but at the same time, it's not always necessary because I'll be using something else for mana, and typically skip turn 6. So what turn 6 usually is dropping one of these. When I say turn 6, I mean turn 5, but with 6 mana, because I skipped over that. So, yeah, that's typically what it turns into, is dropping the Hyperspeed Dragon instead of dropping a Bolgash. But Bolgash is definitely very good and has its own place in this deck. Lord Skycrusher's in here because he can drop and pump up the weenies, basically, is what he would do. I mean, if you think about it, you've got your Great Arena set up, you've got your Hyperspeed Dragon set up, and however many creatures you've got. When you drop one of these, that just turns this guy into a double breaker to help you finish the game off, because if you've got these 3, you can finish the game if you've already broken one shield, and sometimes Essence Elf gets in a random attack or something, and one more creature on top of this just finishes the game with it. It makes this, it just comes out as a good drop. Eventually these 2 will probably come out for one more Bolgash Dragon and one more Moorna, but I only have 2 Bolgash and 2 Moorna for now. But even then, I'm happy with the Lord Skycrushers, because they definitely work when you can drop them consistently and use their effects. But, I mean, my reasoning behind it is there, but it's also the fact that I don't have the 3rd of either Bolgash or Moorna, which I am working on, trust me. I'm working on finishing my playset of everything, but that's not the only reason. Just, it can be replaced, the 2 Skycrushers can be replaced for a 3rd Bolgash and a 3rd Moorna, but they don't have to be. They work fine where they are as Skycrushers. So, next up, I'm just going to put them down here. I've got the 2 Crimson Wyverns. Typically finish the game off with this. I don't typically play it unless it's going to finish the game. Sometimes I will. Like if they've got 2 or 3 blockers and I don't have a Bolgash Dragon out or something, or I want to be able to attack with my Moorna. Only problem with it is it's an attack raptor, not an armored dragon, so Hyperspeed Dragon doesn't affect it. It's not as good. And it's only 3,000 power, which is yet another reason that a next turn Skycrusher could help, but typically this thing doesn't even attack. I just use it for the effect of dropping it. But it's definitely good because you've got so many creatures out, they can just start dropping the blockers, and I mean, most of your creatures are rendered useless by the blockers because of that. Once again, Bolgash Dragon does the same job, but on a lower scale, which is why I like having the Crimson Wyverns in here too. Even if I had a 3rd Wyvern, by the way, I wouldn't be running 3. I like having 2, typically one gets charged and one's available for the end game. That's typically how it goes. Bolgash Dragon can't get rid of as many blockers as this, so if you're facing a really blocker-heavy deck with this, that's when this is mostly useful. Or if somehow you don't have your Bolgash Dragons, say they see it as a threat and they get rid of your Bolgash Dragons and you're not able to control that, there you go. Or this can really push for game, whereas if you only have a Bolgash Dragon and they've got 2 blockers, you can tap to attack, kill a blocker, and they still have 1 left to block you with. So it just gets rid of all blockers for you. It's just a little one-up on Bolgash Dragon. A lot of the times this gets charged, though. Don't want to have too much blocker hate for, you know, when there's like a mirror match of Fire Nature, especially because a different type, a non-Hyperspeed Dragon Fire Nature deck, is going to be trying to kill you before you can even set up all your Hyperspeed Dragon stuff. But it's pretty safe to say that once your Hyperspeed Dragon comes out in a Fire Nature matchup, as long as you've got like an Essence Elf, you're pretty much going to win, as long as they're not using the same deck. So I've got the Mana Engine, 3 Bronze Arm Tribe, which typically don't even get played. They only get played when my turn 4 alternatives aren't around. And by turn 4 alternatives, I mean either control or this thing, and this thing usually gets searched out or something on turn 3 so that it can be played. My other turn 3 alternative on top of searching is Razorhide. Razorhide definitely helps. This is mostly where I get my mana acceleration, but a lot of times these two just end up charged because the deck doesn't really need mana acceleration as I thought it would originally, but they still definitely have their place in the deck. It's just, what with all of the Hyperspeed Dragon, just speed power, and the Great Arena draw power, plus other stuff that I can play on turn 3 or 4, these things get neglected a little bit. It's just their alternatives that are there, and depends on the situation. Against a Fire Nature deck, I might be going with that instead. It just depends on the matchup, because I'll know a decent amount about the matchup by turn 3 when I can play those. Just 3 Essence Elves here for boosting power. You know, it's kind of obvious what Essence Elf does is really good for this, especially when you think about how close some of your creatures are to being, you know, killed by certain cards. You get 2 Essence Elves out, and your Moornas, at least, and Lord Skycrushers would be safe from things like Deathlagger, I guess. Well, they wouldn't be safe, but they would be able to, you know, kill themselves at the same time as killing the Deathlagger, or whatever. Not that Deathlagger should be too much of a problem, because you have removal. By that, just root traps, but that's not typically your biggest concern, is that your opponent has 1 finisher, because by the time they're playing finishers, you're playing finishers too. And that's how this deck works. But the main way that you're going to get around big creatures is with stuff like Bolgash Dragon. So that thing gets around Grand Gur. They'd have to have 2 Grand Gurs to stop it. And the thing is, it could put you above some light blockers like Keeper of Twilight. So they'd have to have Grand Gur to get past any of your creatures, really. Now the removal. I've got 3 Comet Missile for, you know, blockers early game. Sometimes you'll want to, maybe you'll have an Essence Elf and a Razorhide, and you won't have any really good turn 4 plays, so you'll just drop this maybe instead, and get the Razorhide to survive and not get blocked. Or maybe you're facing a pesky like Scared Orbital of Gloom Hollow, or something like that. Next up, the 3 Tornado Flame, also really good. You know, it gets rid of 5,000 or less, which against this deck would work, so long as it doesn't have an Essence Elf. It would get rid of the Hyperspeed Dragons. Certainly gets rid of the Great Arena, which is another pesky creature. And I'm playing 2 Rockbite. I haven't seen people use this too much. It's kind of a weak card. You get 2,000 less destruction for 1 less mana. But the thing is, that turn 4 can be crucial. And in your shields, it's just one more thing to destroy that last creature that wants to poke at you for the win. Because your kind of backed into a corner if you can't attack their untapped creatures with Moorna, or if you can't control them out of there. I haven't had too much trouble. This deck has been doing really well, as I've said, in testing, but I haven't seen it against every matchup yet, and that's something that needs to be considered. So that's the fire control, or destruction. It's pretty much the same thing in this game. Got 3 root traps for the really big pesky creatures. Mostly want to reserve these for, well, a lot of times they get charged, because most things in this deck get charged up until you can start drawing with the Great Arena or something along those lines, which isn't too bad. That's like turn 5 is the first time you get to draw, so it's not too bad, especially because your draw power gets to stay out there for you. I really love the Great Arena. Hyperspeed Dragon and the Great Arena are like the best fire nature cards like ever. So I've got these thrown in for big pesky finishers that I can't handle, or just for getting rid of any creature that might be the deciding factor in the game. And finally, to finish up the removal, I've got 3 Return to the Soil for, you know, anything pesky. If I'm getting poked by a Heal of Flame early game, and they hit the shield, gets rid of it permanently for once. Pretty much still the only way to get around it without blocking it. And even then, the blockers are kind of sketchy on that one, because they typically just get killed off anyway. Because it's fire, it has blocker hate everywhere. And then my only search engine, which bumps this deck up to 43 cards, but I find it works really well. I wanted to stick to 40, but I found that this 43rd set here really helps. So it's just, I've got 2 creatures that I really need to have as soon as I can play them. And I've already said that plenty of times. Hyperspeed Dragon and the Great Arena. So if you're attacking me early game to try to get me down on shields before I can start doing my thing, this thing can be hit. I can search one of these. This is a great turn 3 option. That's typically what I opt out of Razorhide for. And it's pretty much the reason I can get so many of these. Ideally, I would have one of these on the field and 2 of these on the field, if possible. But that's another thing turn 6 can get skipped for, is another one of these. So the order would kind of be like this, then this, or this, then another one of this, and then this, or something. If you can get one of these out of the way, I'd like to have another one. More search power. Late game drawing this thing can save you. You think about it, if you've got the 40 card deck without these, and you're drawing late game because they killed off this, or you were never able to get it, or something like that, this lets you search 5 cards in. Granted, you have to pay 3 mana to do it, but in this deck, late game, you'll have probably 8 to 10. So you'll be able to play something like a searched Hyperspeed Dragon. You'll be able to play something up to even a searched Tatsurion. Stuff like that. And that's really helpful to be able to search 5 cards deep and know that maybe a couple turns from now you wouldn't have been there because you would have only gotten a card you needed 3 turns from now. And that's where this comes in handy too, is late game. So early game and late game, the card is amazing, and it really helps out. So that's been my Hyperspeed Dragon deck. I hope you guys enjoyed this, video and stuck with it the whole 20 minutes or so. I know it's long. The list is in the description, so you don't have to watch this again if you want the list. It's working really well for me. If you guys have any suggestions on it, go ahead, shoot away. And if you want to check out my trade binder video, help me get those Bolgashes and Moornas and stuff. Everything else I'm missing too. So, yeah, thanks for watching, guys. And just, if you guys want to ever leave a video response too, that would be cool. And of your own version of this or another deck profile, I'll most likely accept it as long as it's not stupid. I'm not saying as long as the deck's not stupid, but just as long as you're not making some trolly video. I'll most likely accept it as a video response. And, yeah, that's it. So, this deck, I'm thinking, could be one of the top decks of the game for now, until evolution creatures. We'll see how that goes. So, yeah. Thanks a lot, guys.